Hello, humans! Whoa! How do you like that, everyone? Hello, humans! It's me, Ellie Krug, on Ellie 2.0 Radio. I am thrilled to be talking to you, and I'm talking to you live. Otherwise, we would have done a different intro when my voice cracked. How are you? Happy Saturday. Happy Saturday that it's spring, actually spring in Minnesota Saturday. I planted some flowers yesterday. Let me just tell you how wonderful that was. So here I am. You have me live. And so you know, if you know it's live, because I don't get to be live as nearly as much as I want to, although I'll be live next weekend as well. My number to give me a call, because I'd love to hear from you, is 952-946-6205. I'd love to hear from you if you'd like. Well, we've got a good show. I don't have an interview, but don't worry about it, okay? We're going to begin with a story about an upcoming anniversary of one of the most painful events in the civil rights movement. Then we're going to talk about Roe versus Wade, this Dobbs case coming out of Mississippi, and what the darn Supreme Court is doing. And in that same vein, I want to talk about what the Dobbs decision portends for LGBTQ plus rights. That would be my community. Then we're going to talk about what's happening with school boards in Minnesota. And, of course, I'll always give you a little bit of my update on my work as an idealist, which may include me talking about a reality check that I recently had. But, again, since this show is live, I'd love to hear from you and love to talk with you about anything you want. But in lieu of a featured idealist this week, I want to mark an important but horrific event in the civil rights movement. I'm talking about the murders of 3 civil rights workers in Philadelphia, Mississippi. Those workers were Michael Schwerner, who was a 24-year-old civil rights worker from New York City, who was working with CORE, C-O-R-E, the Congress of Racial Equality, working to register blacks to vote in Mississippi in the summer of 1964. The other 2 men who were killed, Andrew Goodman, 20 years old, he was from New York City, and he had been recruited to work for CORE by John Lewis. The third man, both Goodman and Schwerner were white. The third man, James Chaney, 21 years old, was black and had been born in Mississippi. All 3 men were idealists in the highest possible degree. They gave their lives for their idealism. Their murders occurred on June 21, 1964, and soon it will be 58 years since those murders occurred. In other words, for me personally, for Ellie Krug, those murders happened in my lifetime. Now think about that. People were being murdered, and they continue to be murdered in America, trust me, on the basis of skin color. But this was an organized execution. Many of you know the story of the murders, just as the summer of 1964 was starting to take off, okay? And Congress was on the verge of passing the Civil Rights Act. And President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act on, I think, July 2nd, 1964. But as the summer of 64 kicked off, there was a push to register black voters in the Deep South, voters who up till that time had been disenfranchised. And the KKK, the Klu Klux Klan, resented white Northerners coming into their state in Mississippi and other states. And in Mississippi in particular, the KKK sought to send a message. Michael Schwerner had talked to the congregation of the Mount Zion Methodist Church in Longdale, Mississippi. He'd done that on Memorial Day, 1964. Now, Longdale is in Neshoba County. The KKK found out about Schwerner talking to that congregation, and they wanted to bring him back to Neshoba County. They wanted to get Schwerner back into Neshoba County because Schwerner's core office was based in Meridian, down on the coast of Mississippi, and Philadelphia is in the interior of the state, and they wanted to get him back into Neshoba County because they wanted to hurt him. So the KKK burned down the Mount Zion church. That was black church. They burned it down, hoping that they would lure Schwerner back into Neshoba County, and it worked. On June 24th, Schwerner and Goodman and Chaney went to investigate the fire. They went to go and talk to congregation members. And before they left Meridian, they told their colleagues at CORE that if they're not back by 4 o'clock to call, to start looking for them, because they knew that Goodman, Schwerner, and Chaney, they knew that they needed to get out of Neshoba County before it started to get dark. Okay? So their words to the folks in Meridian at the CORE office was, if we're not back by 4, put out the word, because we're in trouble. And so they went to the church. Then they went and spoke to a couple of the congregants from the church, and they got in their vehicle at 3 o'clock to make it back to Meridian by 4. Unfortunately, a couple of things happened. One is they drove through Philadelphia, okay? They attracted the attention of a police officer in Philadelphia. He followed them out of town, and then they got a flat tire. So the police officer came up as they were working to change the tire, and the police officer arrested, I think it was Schwerner, for driving 65 miles an hour in a 35-mile zone, and held the other two. Took them all back to the jail, the Neshoba County Jail in Philadelphia. Took them back to the jail, and that police officer then put out the word to the local Klan that he had them. And they hatched a plan that they would ambush them on the way back out of Philadelphia on the road before they could get to Meridian. And what happened is that the 3 men were released from the jail at about 10 o'clock. They got in their car. They tried to hightail it out of town. And before they knew it, they were being followed by not only a police car, but other cars. Eventually, the police car turned on its light. They felt compelled to pull over. And at that point, they were taken, the 3 men were taken to a clearing off the highway, some distance off the highway. And they were executed by the Klan. Now, I'm telling you all of this because this story, the murders in Philadelphia on June 21, 1964, formed the basis of a story, an Atlantic magazine article titled "Tour Guides to a Tragedy" by Ko Bragg. And the murders formed the basis for the story. As it turns out, Ko Bragg, her stepfather, Obie Riley, was born in Philadelphia, Mississippi. He was 2 years old when the murders occurred. He eventually left Mississippi after high school, but then returned back to Philadelphia. The reason I bring up Obie Riley, and then there's also a woman who lives in Philadelphia, Jewel McDonald. The reason I bring up both Obie and Jewel is that because both of them have become informal tour guides who share about the horror that occurred in Philadelphia on that June night in 1964. And the reason I use the phrase informal tour guides, okay, is because there is no formal acknowledgement or historical marker in Philadelphia to commemorate the murders. In fact, Ko Bragg, the author of this piece in The Atlantic, discovered that there is a Philadelphia Neshoba County Historical Museum. It features exhibits about what life was like in downtown Philadelphia in the 1920s, Philadelphia, Mississippi, that is. There's also another room devoted to Philadelphia native and country music star Marty Stewart, and there's also a veterans memorial on the top floor of this building. Cagg then writes of her trip to the museum, quote, "Our final stop was a replica cabin of the kind you see at Mississippi's Giant House Party, the Neshoba County Fair. The event is an annual week of horse racing, politicking, beer chugging, and whiteness. The fair was where Ronald Reagan launched his presidential campaign with a speech about states' rights, a loud dog whistle not far in the distance or time from the Freedom Summer murders. That's what the murders are called, the Freedom Summer murders. In the town's pride and it's the town's pride and part of the reason Philadelphia's tagline is, quote, "Our Fair City." Keg writes, "At the end of the tour, I asked my guide if maybe I had missed the Mount Zion exhibit. That would be the Mount Zion exhibit about the church being burned down. And, quote, continuing to read from the Atlantic piece, "This is supposed to be back before the 60s, you know. And all that happened in the 60s, she said." That would be the museum curator. "We don't have anything on that." We stood in silence. A museum board member later confirmed that it doesn't have anything on Mount Zion or the murders, and that curators focus on the agricultural and industrial history of the county, not social justice or race. "We stay away from issues that would be controversial," he said. These are the kinds of... Hold on. I want to also give you one more quote from Ko Bragg. Ko Bragg. Quote, "But despite the silence in Neshoba County, the markers of this history are all around, if you know where to look. They're in church cemeteries and in the stories passed down, the ghosts that appear to haunt only some of us. Especially during the past 2 years of the pandemic, when gathering with elders has been tricky at best, I've been anxious about all of the memories, histories, and knowledge we stand to lose. They are the stewards of this nation's civil rights, and I fear that our history might die with them," unquote. So what Bragg is writing is that these informal tour guides, Obi and Jewel, they're the only ones holding everything together about the history in Philadelphia. Those who run the county, those who run the town, they don't want to acknowledge because it's too painful. It's going to stir things up. It's going to create problems. It's going to make people uncomfortable. Any of that sound familiar to you? That's what we're hearing about this critical race theory. Oh, my God. God forbid we talk about how American history and created structural racism and how it's still around. God forbid that we talk about that. So it's better that we don't talk about any of that because we'll make people uncomfortable. I thought it was a fascinating story in the Atlantic and highly, highly recommend it because it is important. It's absolutely important that we know what happened in order to not repeat it. Okay, all right, well, there you go. We're going to take a break. I'd love to hear from you, 952-946-6205. Please give me a call. When we come back, I'm going to play a clip. That New York senator yesterday just rocked it about Roe. Bye.
How long till my soul gets it right? Did any human being ever reach that kind of light? I call on the resting soul of Galileo, king of night vision, king of insight.
And we're back. Ellie 2.0 Radio, live. So if you're so inclined, I'd love to hear from you. Give me a call at 952-946-6205. I love talking to my listeners. Now, I want to shift and I want to talk about what happened this week. As I'm sure you've been on this station, you've been hearing a lot about what happened this week with the draft. And we need to make sure that I emphasize that it's a draft opinion in the Dobbs case about the Mississippi abortion law, in which, in this leaked opinion, 80-some pages, Justice Alito writes and holds that Roe is Roe should be overturned. There should be no precedent value to Roe v. Wade, and that the question of abortion should be left to the states rather than to the federal government. I mean, I am positive that many of the listeners here are well aware of what happened this week, and I'm positive that many of you are incensed by it. On the way in this morning as I was coming here, I was listening to MSNBC on my car radio, and the part of the discussion was about how even with Dobbs being leaked, the outrage really isn't there from a lot of quarters, including from men. Hardly any men have spoken up. And hardly any members of Congress have spoken up. Although one member, a senator, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand from New York, she did speak up. And we're going to play a clip. It's a little long. It's about 3 minutes, 44 seconds. It's well worth listening to. We're going to play a clip, and I'll talk to you on the other side of the clip about what she has to say. By the way, pay attention to the last sentence or two of what she says, because it portends, whatever the word is, what may also happen after Roe goes away. Okay. Thanks, Dan.
This is an issue that is defining for this country today. And if the American people don't stand up for equality for every American at this moment in time, we will be undermining a right to privacy in more than this context. Women deserve freedom and bodily autonomy. We deserve to be able to make decisions about when we are having children, under what circumstances we are having children, how many children we are having, and at what time we are having children. I would like to speak to America's men for 1 minute. Imagine you do not have authority over your own body for 10 months. Imagine if that decision-making would not be taken away, even if you would die in childbirth, even if you couldn't decide who you were having children with, even if you couldn't decide when you were having that child. I don't think a man in America could actually imagine not having control of his body, his bodily functions, what happens to him, and what life would be like for 10 months. It is an outrage that we have 5 justices on the Supreme Court who lied in their confirmation hearings in order to be confirmed. It is an outrage that in America today, that our judicial system is so corrupted and so politicized and no longer representative of the will of the people. 5 justices said they respect precedents. 5 said that Roe v. Wade was established precedents. 5 said they would never undermine established precedent. It is unconscionable what this decision will do to the American people. I do not think that 50% of America should be told that they have to put their bodies at risk of life or death without their consent. It is barbaric, it is inhumane, it is unacceptable, and I hope every human being in this country understands that when you take away a woman's right to make her decisions about her health and well-being, she is no longer a full citizen. She no longer has freedom. She no longer has bodily autonomy. She no longer has basic civil rights or civil liberties. That is what this decision would do in America today. Make no mistake, equal rights, constitutional rights to privacy, the ability to make your own decisions about your own life and your own death are on the ballot in November. I hope there is no one who's confused about this. It may happen to your daughter, it may happen to your wife, it may happen to your mother, it may happen to your transgender friend. It may happen to anyone, and it is not acceptable. This is a life or death moment, and we need to fight like it is.
Everyone, that was Kirsten Gillibrand, senator from New York, talking about the draft opinion, the leaked Dobbs decision, and what it would mean for Roe to be nullified, Roe v. Wade. The thing I want to point out is that this isn't just simply about, abortion, as she said. The laws that are, there are, I think it's about a dozen states that have trigger laws, which, they're already on the books, that if Roe is invalidated, automatically, those states will ban abortion. Now, please understand, those bans in most of those states are bans against abortion even if the woman is raped by a stranger on a street, even if she is the victim of incest from that horrible uncle or father, even if the mother likely will die in childbirth. Those laws don't care. Just consider that. How unbelievably cold. Okay, it looks like we might have a caller. Dan, just go ahead and patch him through. Hello, this is Ellie Krug.
Hi, Ellie. It's Lynette.
Hey.
How are you?
Hey, Lynette. Good to hear from you.
Oh, thank you for playing that Christian Gillibrand. I have a few things to say about that. I have never voted for any politician that's ever been against abortion because it's very inhumane. It isn't just a woman's issue. Absolutely not. It affects all of us. And, on a lighter side, metaphorically, I have a question that I like to ask people about, okay, I'll ask you. Do you know of anybody that likes crowds or loves, being in traffic, standing in line? Have you ever heard anyone? Usually they'll say, oh, I got somewhere before there was a crowd, or, I got there, no one was there, it was great. The hypocrisy to me of this is that most of these people that will say that they are, for every human being to be born, doesn't want to stand in line anywhere, doesn't want to feel the results of more people around us. You don't see those signs, those billboards that are, pro-life, where there's a lot of people. You see them out in the country where people are living with lots of space around them. They don't want to live near a lot of people. If you love lots of people and you want every human to be born, then go spend some time in India, go spend some time in China, go to places where there's a result of many, many, many humans. This country does not know what that's like. People in North Dakota are against abortion because there's no people that live there. This is such a hypocrisy in so many ways, and that's one of the things that I like to bring up to people is no one likes crowds, and yet you want every human to be born. Really? I don't think they've thought this through.
Well, that's a great, I've never considered that before, but that's a really great point, Lynette. Of course, there's the George Carlin bit that I saw yesterday about abortion, and as he points out so well, is that they want to protect the abortion, anti-abortion people want to protect the sanctity of life up till the moment of birth, but then forget it about that. They don't want to do any prenatal stuff. They don't want to do any Head Start stuff. They don't want to do any mother, care after the birth or the child care after the birth. They don't want to fund schools. They don't want to fund, food programs. They don't want to do any of that. So how much do they care about humans?
It's really kind of a pathetic joke. This idea you want every baby to be born. No, you don't. It just sounds like something to be for. And it's just so disgusting. It makes me very upset, as you can tell.
Yeah, no, and I mean, for me, it's not only that; it's just the radicalness of it, in the sense that we don't care if you got raped by a stranger on a dark street, and now,
Yeah, but
now
you know darn well that if this is in their family, because if this happens to their daughter, and I'm talking about people that say they're for this. I mean, when I had an abortion years ago, I remember talking to one of the nurses there, and my mother was with me at the time, and she said, you know, my mom said, "Oh, there's nobody protesting today," and this was back in the 80s. And she goes, "Yeah, you know, she said the really crazy thing is she said that some of those people that are out there in the parking lot protesting will come in with their daughters and say, 'Oh, do they have to be in the room with those women?' And she said, I've had to say to them, 'Oh, did your daughter get pregnant in a different way than those women?' You know, like, oh, it's okay for when they need
Right.
it, but not for those other people." That's why it's just so ridiculous.
Well, Lynette, thanks for the vulnerability, though, about sharing about your personal story. I really appreciate that. It's good to hear from you, and thanks for calling. I really appreciate it. I always appreciate when you call in. Okay, all right. Well, take care, all right?
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
All right, everyone, we've got to take another break. When we come back, I want to talk about what Kirsten Gillibrand said at the very end of that wonderful, wonderful speech. And we're back on AM 950, listening to me, Ellie Krug. So, as you heard at the end of Kirsten Gillibrand's speech, she talked about the impact on mothers, you know, sisters, daughters, and she said, referenced your transgender friend. And the reason for that is because Dobbs, as it is written right now, opens the door to going after privacy rights that Roe helped enumerate, that helped those privacy rights to protect LGBTQ people. And so I'm reading quickly here from a Vox article by Ian Millhiser, dated May 6, 2022. He writes this, okay? Quote, "The central thrust of Alito's draft opinion in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, the case seeking to overrule Roe, is that only rights that are, quote, deeply rooted in this nation's history and tradition and, quote, implicit in the concept of ordered liberty are protected." Here's the deal, okay? Justice Alito has dissented from every opinion that has ever protected LGBTQ people. He's dissented in part by claiming, that the idea of protecting LGBTQ people it must bow to conservatives, okay, because it will make people feel bad. All right, that what Alito fears, as he's written in his dissents, is that if we give LGBTQ plus people rights, it's going to tamp down the religious rights of people to object. And so we've got the person writing the Dobbs opinion who has always objected to LGBTQ people getting the vote, the right to marry, the right to work and not be fired because they're LGBTQ plus. But as it relates to transgender people in particular, okay, my concern is that they will come gunning for us, literally. That this will open the door to say, you can never, ever identify, legally change your status from anything past what you were born with for plumbing. I'll come back to this in another day, no doubt. We've got to take another break. When we come back, I'll do a little bit on my C block. Thanks.
She will
And I'm back. Ellie 2.0 Radio. Okay, some of the wonderment of live radio is that when you say something that's not complete or doesn't make sense, there's not much you can do about it. And, I am totally a novice at this business. If you want the pro, you got Matt McNeil, okay? And God, Matt is just perfect, all right? He is just great. And then you get me, okay, who stumbles over her words and all kinds of things. As I was finishing up the piece about how Dobbs can affect LGBTQ plus people, I kind of stumbled because I didn't really make the point that I wanted to make. And I'm going to make that quickly, and then I got to move on and talk about other things. Here's the deal, okay? In the Dobbs decision, Alito writes that only rights that are, quote, deeply rooted in this nation's history and tradition and implicit in the concept of ordered liberty are protected by the Constitution. Okay? Only those kinds of rights. Now, of course, we could go back to the fact that the Constitution enshrines slavery, okay, and that women had no rights whatsoever, and that, people who are LGBTQ, when the Constitution, this was a crime. This was so if the test is going to be deeply, rooted rights in the nation's history, deeply rooted, okay? The idea that you might be transgender is just impossible because there was no such thing back when the Constitution was ratified. Not publicly. There have been people who have identified of the other gender and dressed in the other clothing throughout the history of the world. But there was no such thing as transgender people. And so, that's why. That's why I'm worried. That's why I'm afraid. Because I've already heard talk about a national law come, November, and the Republicans are in control with maybe Donald Trump as the Speaker of the House. I've already heard about a push for a national law to prevent transgender girls from playing in sports. Okay, and it's not. There'll be other steps, against transgender people after that. So, at any rate, okay, that's why I'm worried about Alito. That's why I'm worried about the Dobbs decision. Okay, let me move on. I want to talk with you about school boards. How's that sound? And part of this is coming from a piece in the 74 that came down on May 4th of 2022 by Beth Hawkins. She cites some statistics here, okay? And these are statistics that come from the Minnesota School Board Association, all right? There are 2,200 elected officials, from school boards in the state of Minnesota. And since the start of the 2020-2021 school year up to February of 2022, 86 school board members resigned. So far in 2022, out of that 86, 26 have quit. 6 of those quit in April. Now the normal attrition, okay, for school board members is 12 to 15 board resignations per year. Okay? So that's normal. We have going on, I don't know, what is that, 5-6 times the normal rate of resignations happening. And why? So Beth Hawkins, she focuses on a man named Bob Nystrom from Brainerd, Minnesota. He was on the Brainerd, Minnesota Public School Board. And Nystrom has recently resigned. And he resigned because parents accuse school board members, we're talking in Brainerd, okay, of all kinds of things. Very angry over critical race theory in Brainerd, Minnesota, angry over masks, angry over a whole lot of things, okay? You may recall that several months back, a couple months at least back, I had Kelsey Waits on my show. She was the school board member for the Hastings, Minnesota school board, whose a transgender child was outed in the process of Kelsey running for re-election for the school board. And outed by parents seeking to keep Kelsey from winning and to punish Kelsey and her family, which ended up Kelsey Waits needed to move out of Hastings to protect her, what she believed to protect her family and her child. And so, this school board thing, what happens with school boards when we don't, and Beth Hawkins writes this, when we don't have people that are stepping up, people, being willing to do civic duty because of the vitriol associated with, being on a school board. And think about how fundamental it is to be on a school board, because it is about the education of a child. And what we're trying to do is produce, knowledgeable, active, competent, responsible citizens to run our democracy. It's not going to work without people being actively engaged, and we've got to educate them. We have to educate them in order for them to be actively engaged. So, all right, well, just school boards, pay attention to what's going on in your local school board. Please do that. Now, let me talk about my C block in the 6 minutes less or so that I've got left. My C block here, I always talk about my work as an idealist. I am an idealist. My phrase is hopeless idealist, although somebody this week pointed out, Ellie, that's kind of an oxymoron. And maybe I should be just saying I'm hopelessly idealistic. Although we say hopeless romantic, and everybody knows exactly what you're talking about. At any rate, my work. So you may know, we just got done talking about schools. So one of the things that I am trying to do is to go into schools and talk to, in particular, LGBTQ plus kids. There are organizations in schools called Gay Straight Alliances. Sometimes they're called Gender and Sexuality Alliances, GSAs. And they have kids in them. And many times, these organizations exist because this is a place where kids can be safe. There's a lot of bullying that goes on in schools against LGBTQ plus kids, as well as against any kid who is different or other. And so this week, I was able to go to a middle school in my school district. That's Eastern Carver County School District. I went to a middle school. I had fifth and sixth graders in the room with me. And let me just tell you, I think there were 24 kids, 25 kids. Let me just tell you, these humans, smart, very self-aware, very engaged. I'm in awe. I was in awe of them every time I go and I speak to young humans. I'm in awe at just how in tune they are with things that I had no idea about at their ages. And it's a humbling experience that I come in and talk with them, and we talk about things like, what is your mantra? What is the thing that you say in your head? We talk about the power of human authenticity. What makes you authentic? It's not just about gender or sexuality. It can be if you're a writer or a musician or whatever. And I met an 11-year-old this week who the degree of maturity and self-awareness just blew me away. And so, this is good work. It's good work. Next week, I'm going to talk to educators and administrators about how to be welcoming to trans and non-binary kids. I'm going to do that as well. And I hope that I can continue to work with kids, work with youth, because it nourishes me and it fuels my idealism, because it reminds me of why I do the work that I do generally around diversity and inclusion and all kinds of things. Okay, all right. Now, before I go, I want to talk about me learning still. So, I think that we all get into these modes where we believe, people all think the same way that we do. Okay? At least the ones that we hang out with, the ones that we socialize with. And I got reminded recently that that's not the case. And it's so much upset me, that would be the right word, okay, that I got up and I walked away. I just said, I got to go. And then within a minute or two, once I was away, I said, what are you doing? This is the kind of thing that you talk to people about. This is the kind of thing that you tell people they have to sit in when it's bumpy, that when it's uncomfortable, they can't run away. What are you doing, Ellie? What? Are you going to be a hypocrite, Ellie? So I went back. I did. I went back and re-engaged with that person. And hopefully my walking away wasn't the thing that caused any kind of fracture in the relationship. Well, I see I've got music that's telling me I'm done. And so I need to do a big thanks to my producer, Dan. Dan, thank you very much. Listeners, thanks. And Lynette, thanks for calling. Next week, I'm going to be live. I have a couple of men in here to talk about white men and their privilege and how they're trying to work to become better allies to people who are different or other. In the meantime, visit my website at elliekrug.com. Reach out to me on Gmail at lejkrug@gmail.com, and I will be back next week. Thanks so very much.